Hi guys, Spanners here. Yesterday we recorded a long-ranging interview with Matthew Carter, who was the CEO and team principal of Lotus F1. And if you've been listening to Missed Apex long enough, you'll know that he used to pop in very regularly. Not only had he worked within Formula One as a team boss, but he was also very connected in motorsport. And then came the disastrous attempt to host an E-Prix in Vancouver. Now, I'm delighted personally to have Matthew Carter back in the shed speaking to us about Formula One, because he's always had a great take. He always says, well, I can't really say much more on that, and then tells us a bunch of stuff. But we had to obviously acknowledge that there's a lot of residual anger, frustration, and confusion about the Vancouver E-Prix. So before we could get to chatting about Formula One, I asked him if we could get to the bottom of that, and he did as usual. He said, well, I can't really say too much because of legal and contractual things. But then he did go on to say a lot of things, not as much as I know he would have wanted to say and has said to us privately. So obviously my main concern, which has kind of been dispelled by having regular conversations with him and texts and WhatsApps and stuff, is his mattress stuffed with cash from ticket sales? Obviously, I wouldn't want to then have Matthew on if that was the case. But, you know, having spoken to him loads and worked with him a lot here on Missed Apex, I would have been so surprised if that had been the case, if it had been he'd like a supervillain trying to steal ticket money. And I wouldn't be speaking to him if I thought he had ripped off punters. And if my opinion counts, my opinion is he's tried to put on something cool in good faith, and it's gone wrong. And I've had journalists tell me versions or what they think happened in Vancouver that match up with what Matthew's been telling me sort of all along. Look, this show, it has been limited a little bit by what he can say, and you'll see some cuts, you'll see some edits. I had to re-go over the whole show with a sort of lawyery eye, because that's still the situation that he's in. But I wanted to get through that so that we could start talking about some F1 stuff. So if you're not interested in the Vancouver stuff at all, you can skip forward like 12 minutes, I think. But I found the Vancouver stuff fascinating, and there's no way we could have spoken to Matthew without addressing that first. And it was a big story at the time, and this is the first time that Matthew Carter has given his side at all. I think the other parties involved were able to speak freely to the press, and he wasn't. And I really wish he could have been as forthright on the show as he was in private, but he's got a legal line, and I've respected that in the show and in the edit as well. But I want to hear from Matthew Carter, and if you do too, here's the episode. So here is former CEO of Lotus F1, Matthew Carter. I started off by asking him how he was doing and what went wrong.
It's been a trying couple of years, I guess. And I'm just sort of starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But we were a company that were the promoters of the race itself, that held the license for the FormulaE race in Canada. I was obviously the figurehead or the spearhead of that company, so the buck does stop with me to a certain extent. But there's not a lot that I can say for various contractual and I guess legal reasons. But I'm happy to go into as much as we can.
People were obviously concerned about getting refunds for tickets. Mm-hmm. You sold 30,000 tickets for the Vancouver E-Prix. I'd just love to get your take or a situation update, and what happened to the people who bought tickets for the Vancouver E-Prix?
Well, the first thing I'll pick you up on is when you say we sold, obviously we used a ticketing company, and that's how events work. So the event organizer themselves doesn't get the money usually until 90 days after the event's finished, something like that. And there's a number of things that a lot of stars had to align in the wrong way to make it fail. A big reason, and I hate to use this as an excuse, but we were coming out the back of the pandemic. Everything changed during that pandemic. Everything from contracts with performers down to the way that the city, in this case the city of Vancouver, dealt with events, the way that ticketing companies dealt with holding on to ticket holders and buyers' funds. Everything changed. The laws, the rules, everything changed. So we came off the back of that. And then I guess, you pointed out the number of tickets we sold. I guess we were kind of victims of our own success. I think we sold more tickets in the first 3 hours that we went on sale than any other Formula E event ever sold full stop. So that in itself caused concern, should we say, trepidation from the city of Vancouver, as I said just now, from Formula E themselves.
Because of a lot of people congregating so soon after the pandemic.
Straight after the pandemic when no one had events. As I say, Formula E themselves got a little bit concerned because they'd never sold so many tickets either. They were concerned about how the event was going to take place. They were concerned about that the emphasis was going to be moved away from them because of, if you remember, we also had some music artists performing at the same time. So, but before we get into all those details, to go back to the ticketing itself,
Yes.
The tickets themselves were bought through a ticketing company. The ticketing company had an onus or has an obligation to refund those funds if the event didn't take place. They tried every which way they could to get away with not doing that, as far as I'm aware. And again, I am probably 2 steps removed from the process and have been since April 21st when it was cancelled. 2022, sorry, yeah, 2022. But as far as I'm aware, and everyone that I've spoken to, if the ticketing company didn't refund the funds, then the bank or credit card company that you used should have done that. And the people I've spoken to, certainly the people that have been in contact with me directly, have managed to get their money back.
That's the main concern, and clearly that wasn't a clear process and was messy, and there was lawsuits involved. And I know Matthew here is much more restricted than I am, but certainly from looking on forums, people were able to engage, certainly with companies like Visa and American Express, to be able to do like a straightforward cashback. Sorry, Trumpets is here. I don't think you've said anything yet, Matt, but he's been here the whole time, and you have a question.
Not for lack of trying. You've had me on mute up until now. No,
that's not true. I don't silence people.
I just want to get into the ticket vendor thing a little bit because I did have a very specific question about that. And that comes from having been to a Formula One event now and seeing that not only is there like the ticket vendor, but people who will also buy tickets and then make packages and resell those tickets. So what you were saying, if I understand you correctly, is that the sales of the tickets is something that was not ever in your direct control. In fact, that you contracted that service out to a third party. So not only do you have the issue of how much leverage you have over that third party, but also were there other companies that were doing that kind of thing, making packages out of this event that increased the complexity of trying to get people refunds with your limited leverage?
Not totally sure how much I shouldn't, can't say, but absolutely hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's everything that you said is correct. Coming out of the pandemic, the rules changed as well as to how, it's the easiest way to put it. There's a reason why the event was postponed and not cancelled. And that didn't come from our side. And I'm sure you can read between the lines as to the difference that makes with regard to refunds. So that was not our decision. It was the decision of the city of Vancouver and I believe the ticketing company, but they decided to postpone rather than cancel the event. And until it was officially cancelled, there's a different set of laws and rules that apply to how you can hold on to customers' funds.
Matthew is saying, if you read between the lines, I'll just read what the press was saying at the time. So the race said, it's an election year in Vancouver, so we return to what seems to be a running complexity within Formula E host cities. Politics. The fallout from episodes such as Vancouver is damaging in the sense that if a self-styled green city such as Vancouver essentially, and I'm quoting them here, doesn't want to race, then how many cities actually really do? They weren't all so kind. Matthew Jalopnik pointed the finger at your group, citing a list of milestones that were problematic.
I mean, again, you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's politics. I think it. Again, I don't want to overemphasize, but coming out of the pandemic, trying to put on an event when events hadn't been happening, getting the amount of interest that we got, it all just multiplied on top of itself. We paid a big deposit to the city of Vancouver because they insisted on it. We never asked the city of Vancouver to fund anything. Politics comes into it for sure, 100%. As I say, Formula E themselves, I don't think had done an event at that time, and I don't think to this day they'd not done an event that had been that popular. When it didn't happen in Vancouver because of the city and because of things that happened here, they moved to Portland, which is not that far away, but it wasn't a great success there. So yeah, we'd managed to create interest in something and had really pushed just to get it over the line. And every time a hurdle was thrown at us, we tried to deal with it rather than postpone anything or push it back or wait. I mean, Vancouver as a city, as I now know, is overly cautious when it comes to events, and this would have been the biggest thing that had happened in Vancouver since the Winter Olympics. And they just threw roadblock after roadblock in our way. When you talk about the milestones, I think that's a little bit misleading because there was a set of milestones again that were put in place by the city of Vancouver and weren't necessarily the same milestones that other events or other promoters had to deal with. So there was a lot going on. There's still, to this day, I still maintain the fact that we could have put the race on. They were absolutely convinced that we didn't have enough time to put the race on. Even FormulaE felt that there was still enough time. But this is between when they forced us to postpone the race in April to when it was due to take place on the 1st of July.
What really caught me out was in just our saying hello chat, good to see you again. The fact that a lot of what you were really up to is exactly where Liberty has gotten to with Formula One. You were actually running ahead of them in terms of how you had conceived of this event. But there's a word I'm thinking of, and it starts with N. There are a lot of them here in New York. It's a NIMBY. And it strikes me that perhaps Vancouver, much like New York, has lots of very local politics and is full of people who don't want things to change and don't wish to be inconvenienced, even if it's a benefit for the city overall to have the event there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I say, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but from day one, they wanted us to push it back a year because of the pandemic and everything. And we basically said, why? We'll deal with any issues that we've got. If we rewind back to the middle of the pandemic, which was when this all sort of took place, or started to formulate, if you like. The reason that we were doing it the way we were doing it was because of my background in Formula One and what I'd seen going to every single Formula One race around the world and what works and what doesn't work, and taking little bits of all those things and trying to put them all together. We were going to have a support race with celebrities in it. We were going to have two concerts on the Friday and the Saturday night. We were going to have an e-gaming competition where people could come in and they would race against Formula E drivers around the circuit, which was going to be drawn, which was going to be the same circuit as Vancouver. Well, I mean, we called it the Canadian E-Fest as opposed to a Formula E race in Vancouver. It was the Canadian E-Fest, and it was going to be a festival celebrating everything to do with electronic mobility. So we had scooters, we had electric boats, we had an electric plane that was going to fly over the top. We were taking everything. And I think Formula E themselves got a little bit concerned that they weren't the main focus of the event. But they couldn't be the main focus of the event, and the reason that we sold so many tickets was because we diversified so much, and we were selling a whole event as opposed to just a Formula E race.
So we kind of lived that with you during the process, during that planning process, and I just want to say to any listeners who were gutted that it didn't go ahead, no one's more gutted than Matthew Carter. Like, I really felt the passion and the excitement for that event.
As a company and me personally, we're and again, I don't say this lightly, we're millions of dollars out of pocket on the whole thing. There was deposits paid to Nickelback and Shania Twain that were never refunded. There were deposits paid to, we had some speakers that we were going to do like a business forum as well. There were some speakers that were coming there that took deposits. Again, because of the pandemic and because no one had worked for so long, everyone was demanding 50% upfront or more sometimes. And much as we tried to push back, we couldn't. So we had to pay those things. So we were just, at the point that it got cancelled, we were probably at maximum outlay, if you like.
Right.
Before you start to see the returns, you get to the point where the money goes out, and that's where we got to. So, the company, decided to take a step back. We were also hurting from the way that it was being reported in the press and the way that people were talking about it. There was a number of legal issues that we had to deal with. And then we stepped back and let Formula E and the city of Vancouver deal with it. And as you say, I had to sit reasonably quiet.
I want to talk a little bit about the decision to postpone, because I'm picking up on the remark you made earlier that the fact that it was postponed rather than canceled created a number of difficulties, especially with regards to getting refunds for their tickets. And just based on people, tagging me on social media, I'd say that a lot of the anger was the fact that people had laid out this money to go do this thing, and suddenly they couldn't get it back. And since you were the person in charge of the company that was promoting it, it was your fault. And I just want to be clear. You had how much, if any, input into the decision to postpone rather than cancel it so people could get their money back?
It sounds like zero.
Well, yeah. I mean, the answer is zero. Yeah. I mean, it literally, it was an email that was sent. And the reason I know it's the 21st of April, because it was my son's birthday. The email, which was from the city of Vancouver, basically said you either postpone, announce tomorrow that you're postponing it by a year, or we will say that because of you, it's not going ahead. And it was nothing to do with us. It was literally was not on our side at all. So that was the bit that was difficult, and it was very much the wording of it was pre-written. We fought with lawyers for days and days and days to try and get different wording in different ways and means. But ultimately what came out is the only way that it could have come out, and the only way that we could attempt to keep it alive, which then gradually, it became apparent over the months and year that followed that it was never going to happen.
So I make no bones about it. I'm really delighted Matthew's had this opportunity, which I think is the only, not opportunity, like we're blessing him with an opportunity, but the only time we've gotten this full side of the story. So look, if you are the city of Vancouver or FormulaE and you want to give your side of the story, you'll have to pay us more than Matthew bribed us to give this side of the story here today. I would like to move on to some of your views on Formula One, and the FIA is a big story at the moment. So let's link it in slightly and say, Matthew Carter, has your experience as a doomed FIA promoter, has it changed your opinion on what it's like for the relationship between promoters and, say, Liberty Media and things like Vegas as well, where F1 has decided to become the promoter as well? But during the Bernie Ecclestone era, there was always this perceived thing that it's CVC versus the promoters in a lot of ways, and you'd get this feeling that the promoters were feeling squeezed by the sport.
I don't think I've learned any more. It kind of underlines a lot of the things that I already knew. But it's as you say. I mean, I'm not sure that there's any different. I mean, I don't know because I'm not in that world day to day as I used to be. But certainly back in Bernie's day and now with Liberty, so they don't care about the promoters is not true. But they're not. There's a reason that Spa's go into alternate years. There's a reason that Brazil falls off the calendar. There's a reason. Ultimately, they're just going to ask the promoters for more and more money. And that, again, there's a reason that there's 4 races in the Middle East, because that's where the money comes from. So as a promoter, you're buying the rights to hold the race. And ultimately, you're paying a fee to Liberty for them to bring their race to your city or to your circuit, or however you want to word it. And in broad strokes, I mean, there's a lot more nuance to it than this, but in broad strokes, they don't care how many tickets you sell because
they've already got the money. Yeah.
Exactly. So if you sell one ticket, that was one of Bernie's classic quotes. If you sell one ticket or you sell 100,000 tickets, then great, it's down to you. The reason it's called a promoter is because you are promoting that race in that city, and you promote it and you sell tickets for it, and you can do all sorts of different things. Like Austin was the first place that I saw the music artist coming on the Friday night and the Saturday night.
That's right, and that was heavily criticised at the time as well, wasn't it? Was it Taylor Swift? Was that the first one?
It was Taylor Swift, yeah, and it was. And I remember walking out of the circuit in Austin and seeing all the Taylor Swift fans walking in, none of whom had been to the race. But anyway, they had a free ticket to the F1 race, and they hadn't gone to the F1 race. They were coming in at the end of the race to see Taylor Swift. I think it was the only time that she performed live that year or something weird. So that was how they forced those ticket sales, and that's kind of what we did with Formula E. As if you wanted to see Nickelback perform outside or Shania Twain, then you had to buy a ticket for Formula E. And it was, as I say, it's those learnings that I pushed on. But back to the promoter thing, I think Liberty are just doing the same thing that Bernie did, but maybe Vegas was so expensive to put on that I don't think any promoter would have done it. I think that was the only way they were ever going to get the race to be done in Vegas.
Is that like a loss leader then for Liberty, do you think?
Yeah, they've lost hundreds of millions. Yeah, I mean they've bought a huge piece of land because it was the only way they could get the rights to do certain things. So yeah, it's a big loss leader. It's a big, they've pushed all out for the US, as you know. I mean Bernie did lots of things wrong for sure, but one of his things was that he would only ever have one race per country, in order to make it truly a global sport. And you've now got 3 in the US and you've got all the ones in the Middle East. And
so that relationship you were talking about between that Bernie Ecclestone quote with, well, it doesn't matter if you sell one ticket or 20 billion. I don't think it's something we've really addressed or talked about here on Missed Apex podcast, but you can have a track like Silverstone that thinks, well, we are going to sell an amount of tickets, and actually not only is that going to repay what we've paid Formula One for the right to put it on, but actually that's going to support us because we've got some soft power from that. No, so we're Silverstone, we're an F1 race. You also want to come and race your Caterhams here, or something like that. Yeah. And then you've got states like Qatar who are putting on events that can't possibly be making money, and then putting fake fans. I have to say allegedly, I don't know if that covers me, but you've got fans that look like they've just been handed a Ferrari shirt and a placard. And you go, that's a really big philosophical thing in our sport, where you go, these venues, you think it would be like a football ground where Everton and Liverpool do well because they have a passionate fan base. But then you look at some leagues and you go, well, they've attracted the best players and the stands are empty. Yes,
I mean it's a bigger debate, isn't it? I mean, and it falls into the TV deals as well, because my understanding is when Liberty came in, number one of their checklist was to force everyone onto F1 TV globally. It's taken them a while, but I think they're gradually going to push the prices up for the likes of Sky Sports, for the likes of ESPN, for the likes of whoever else. They'll push the cost to have Formula One, they'll push it up to an extent that they'll all back off. And they'll get to a point where the only way that you can watch it is through F1 TV. And if they get however many 400 million people or whoever it is that watch a race, if they can get all those people subscribing to F1 TV, then that's kind of that always was their goal as a media company, which is what they are. It's the same with promoters. If Abu Dhabi want to pay 25 million, Silverstone can't pay 25 million because Silverstone have to make a profit, or they have to make it work. Whereas Abu Dhabi can turn around, or Saudi or Qatar or whoever can turn around and say, we're promoting the country, and therefore we're going to pay more.
Obviously, Bernie it's your problem. It's a you problem if you can't sell tickets.
Yeah.
But in the global world we live in, that's clearly not entirely the case. Do you think there has been a shift with Liberty to assisting promoters, assuming it doesn't cost them too much, in making the event successful locally? Because obviously for Liberty, they don't really care so much about the locally unless it looks bad. If the optics are bad, then they don't like it, because they have a global TV audience they're serving that gives them almost all of their money.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we've mentioned that before, but that's why Bahrain went to a night race, because the overhead shot showed a racetrack in the middle of nowhere with slums all around. So they changed it to a night race. So
is that the reason?
The race was on, yeah, 1,000%. That was the reason they did it. They didn't like the look of what was around and about the racetrack was not good. So they made it a night race. So when you have the overhead shot, all you see is the lit track. So yeah, I mean, the optic, how it looks from the outside, 1,000% they're interested in. But unless something dramatic has changed, they don't help out the promoters. I mean, the Netherlands is that fallen off, or is that going half and half with Spa now?
I think it's done after this season. And again, is what I had heard.
So that came back on the calendar. It had a huge following because of Max and everything. And then they're not going to give them any help, and they're going to gradually. Well, hang on a minute, Netherlands, you're paying us. I don't know, whatever. Let's random figures. You're paying us $10 million. Yeah. Qatar are going to pay us $50 million. So where are we going to go? We're going to go to Qatar. We're going to have 4 races in the Middle East. They can't have many more races. It's impossible. If they start adding more races. I mean, it was at breaking point, again, for context and just so that people remember. I sat on the strategy group for 2 years, and that's the 6 teams that sort of plan the strategy for Formula One going forward. And it was often spoken about. And back then we were at 21 races. And they were saying then, and many more, and we'll be at breaking point. And that would mean that they would have to, you would completely, it would be counterintuitive of what you're trying to do. You'd have to have two lots of race team. So instead of trying to save money or whatever, you've all of a sudden got to train up a whole new group of mechanics, and because it's almost physically impossible for them to get around the world. I mean, for me, for the drivers, rock up on a Thursday evening, sometimes a Friday, leave on a Sunday. But you have to remember that those race circuits that you see on the TV that look lovely with LED screens and names above garages and all that sort of stuff, they're just a generic race circuit with a grey garage. So somebody has to turn up on a Monday or a Tuesday and start to put all that stuff together, and then that same person needs to get from, I don't know, Japan to Singapore. You get to a point of oversaturation at some point as well, and this was talked about a lot in the strategy groups, as to interest, as to levels of interest, as to people's time. It's a commitment to watch. Now you've got sprint races as well. Sprint races qualifying on a race. It's it's a commitment. So do they oversaturate? And therefore, if you get to that oversaturation point, that's kind of where we were heading to. You're going to, as a business, cherry pick the places that are paying the most money.
Can I just say, my wife has cottoned on to sprint races, by the way. And so when I say, oh, there's F1 today, and she's like, is that just a sprint race? And like, she literally says, is that just a sprint race? So it doesn't have the same magic as a Grand Prix.
I'll take the opposite tack. I would say if you're a promoter, you love a sprint race, because when we went to see Miami, the sprint race was really well attended compared to the practice sessions on Friday. So that works. I want to follow up a little bit with the one thing we haven't talked about, which is, as a promoter, you've got an uphill road. The Formula One is going to charge you a bucket, or Formula E, or whoever your race company is going to charge you a bucket to bring their circus to your town. You've got to sell all the tickets, make people want to buy them. But you've not also talked about, how does that interaction work with the FIA, the rules-making body as well? Does that create additional complications for you?
Don't think I haven't seen what you're doing. You're trying to drag us round to the FIA as a topic, which we can do.
I thought that was really good of me. I thought it was pretty very
slick.
smooth.
It wasn't bad.
Me personally, I didn't have anything to do with them. There's associations in all the countries called ASN, which deals with the sort of the rule making of the event, and so I had people that dealt with that side of things. It didn't really impact me that much. With regard to the FIA, I mean, it's what's going on. I just think is crazy. I can't get my head around it.
You're really going to have to narrow it down to which crazy thing you're talking about.
I mean, okay. So as a general overview, and I'm sure this has been mentioned. I mean, Joe will have said this to you many times, but I think Formula One is responsible for about 85% of the FIA's budget. But if they push Formula One away, then Formula One are holding all the cards. I genuinely don't see how the FIA can.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've got a theory, though, because there is a lot of stuff that to us seems crazy. I did mention this a bit last week, and I do apologise. I was talking about British politics with the example I used, and I wasn't being sensitive to the fact that the things I was saying were crazy ideas to introduce to my country and my society specifically were things that were happening in the US. So to the people who pointed that out to me, sorry, I wasn't thinking about that. I understand why that might have been, an insensitive area to go into. But I think he's thinking about this election. So the FIA president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, there is an election coming up. At the moment, he's unopposed. But if you are saying things that make the right noises to the people who are going to vote for you, I think that's why he's been talking about the V10s. I think that's why he's been really forceful on broadcast standards. So I'm not saying that these aren't his genuine, heartfelt views, but you have to think of him more as a politician up for re-election than, a policymaker or a business person, for example. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's 100% fair. But I just think the way that he's gone about it is crazy. I don't know if the bits and the pieces that I've heard from people that I speak to, I don't think he's going to get another term, and I really? Kind of think that's the reason.
I thought he would have been. I thought he'd have been a lock-in because of the way the patronage system works.
Okay.
So what have you
but-
heard? So tell us what you've heard, because it's going to be better than what I've heard.
Okay, so Liberty in the teams, with regard to Formula One and the way Formula One's run, and him trying to stop Vegas, and him trying to, I don't know what he did today with some NDA that he didn't let certain people
He
come
stopped
to the
two
meeting.
people, including the vice president,
David
from getting,
Richards,
from getting
Of
into
sport.
the meeting.
Yeah.
So, but by doing that, all he's doing is alienating Formula. And I don't understand why Formula One is not pushing back, or Liberty and Formula One and the teams are not pushing back harder. And I'm not sure whether or not there's some sort of an agreement that he did all this crazy stuff a year ago, and they kind of sat back and said, okay, well, you don't get another term. We'll let you sort of run away with it for now, and then we'll see where we end
So
up.
what we're seeing is kind of like a lame duck presidency.
Well, there's been limited pushback. I mean, even the Susie Wolf stuff, I think they kind of took a step back on. And they could push more on it. They could. I mean, literally, Liberty and Formula One on the teams hold all the cards.
Can you briefly explain why they hold all the cards?
Well, 85% of the FIA's budget comes from Formula One. So if Formula One walk away, they've got 15% of their budget left.
But they couldn't be called Formula One. So that's the thing So the president was saying, look, we have to remind everyone we own Formula One.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Right. And we've had this discussion before. The problem for FIA is without Formula One, without the teams racing as Formula One teams, the FIA cannot literally afford to do all the rest of its jobs.
Yeah.
It would just simply collapse.
Yeah.
So they would have to essentially, if Liberty walked with the teams currently, they'd have to gin up a substitute they could sell convincingly as Formula One, which, just looking at the money and time involved, is probably a non-starter.
And then probably pick up the name somewhere down the line when the FIA. I mean, I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I just think it's interesting that there's not more pushback from the teams at the moment.
Well, it sounded like what you were describing was sort of a situation where we used to say, give them enough rope and they'll hang themselves. Seems like that might have been the strategy. I'm curious, like you were talking about the NDAs. There was an article in the BBC today. So first of all, apologies if I mistranslate anything. I'm not looking at it.
No, Matt. So I've had few people saying to us, we don't tune into any of the F1 news at the moment because there's so much garbage out there. And I don't advise this, but people have said I get my F1 news from Mr. Apex podcast. Don't do that. But if you are that, we will make more of an effort to sort of we won't assume, Matt, that everyone has read the news stories out there. So what is going on with this story?
Well, it's on-track action today as well. That's the first time.
I know, but by the time
Yes.
we publish this, it'll all be done. So if I sit here and go, Ferrari got this, they've nailed this, and by the end of testing, they basically couldn't string a stint together over Thursday and Friday, I'm going to look like I cursed it personally. So I can't do that. So Matt, non-testing, what was this BBC article?
All right. So the real off-track drama today had to do with what's called the World Motorsports Council. And that is the decision-making body of the FIA. And it's made up of representatives from what you said were the ASNs, these national automotive societies. And each society all over the world sends a representative, and they either meet in person or they meet remotely. And what happened today was that the president of the FIA insisted that anyone coming to today's meeting, where rules were debated and voted on, sign a new and much more stringent non-disclosure agreement. Now, it's notable that two people, one of whom was the vice president for sport, the UK representative, Dave Roberts, that you mentioned, and I cannot off the top of my head remember the other, were denied entry to this meeting and therefore did not get to vote on these rules changes. Now, everyone is focused on the Monaco rules change, which is basically saying you have to use all the tires all the times, because as we all know, racing at Monaco is a spectacle, but it's not really racing. But what also happened was the president of the FIA shifted a large amount of money out of his personal transportation fund to the budgets of a lot of ASNs around the world, in which I don't even
ASNs
know
is like
how,
the local people.
the local motorsport councils. So the ones in the less economically developed countries, is that a correct way to say it? Got a lot of money from the president today. And they were also not there and able to get the details and or have any participation. And my understanding from the article is we've reached the stage of my lawyer is going to be sending your lawyer some letters.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of downloading and getting my head around that at the same time as you are. But the one thing I would say is, if they made the people who went to the meeting sign this stringent NDA, how has that detail come out from the meeting? Surely the NDA is there to stop that detail coming out. Unless he wanted that bit of detail to be leaked. And
I think it was the people who didn't sign it who alerted the BBC. But problematically, the FIA also has rules about participation that may have been violated by him denying them entry to the thing. So my question to you, twice in Formula One's history, we've seen the teams and the FIA and or the commercial rights holder potentially at war with each other. Do you think that's where we're headed now?
Potentially, but what I actually think is going to happen is kind of what I was alluding to before, is that some sort of an agreement will be made between them that this will all get washed up. I mean, what he's done today, or what he did in the build up to this meeting, I think is strange, but I've just got a feeling that they're kind of leaving him to do his stuff, and then with the agreement that they're just going to sit back and just accept what's going on. They, as in Liberty and the teams, sit back, let him do what he's going to do, with the view that he's not going to be in position much longer.
And one more question, because I just remembered off the top of my head. The other thing that's also up for negotiations right now is the Concord Agreement. Mm-hmm. Is that playing into this as well, do you think?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, again,
what is the Concord Agreement?
This is going to lead into another one of these podcasts, isn't it? But I mean, it leads into the whole 11th team discussion, because again, that's all happened since the last time I've spoken to you guys, and that's part and parcel of the Concord. Because honestly, I appreciate everything that's going on with Cadillac and with everything they're doing. I still don't think they're actually going to come into the sport. I still don't think there's going to be...
Hang on. No. Back up and explain that.
You're making Matt
1000%.
panic. So Cadillac, I thought that's done and dusted. They're coming in. How no?
They've signed an agreement in principle to enter the sport.
That is not how it's come across in the media. That's
exactly how it's worded in the media.
Is it?
So there's an agreement in principle for them to enter the sport.
Okay.
Part of that agreement is that they have to be a full engine supplier by the end of the decade.
Ooh,
okay, so by 2029, they have to be. And the only reason, and this is kind of what I'll say the FIA, but it is MBS himself, really. Basically, the agreement between him and the teams was, the team said, look, unless an 11th team is bringing something to the sport, we don't want them to come. But bringing something, I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but effectively that they are bringing something significant to the sport that's going to improve the sport.
Like growth,
that being
maybe.
Cadillac being an engine supplier, which is going to add to the sport. So they said, yeah, we want to do it. We're going to come in, but how are we going to become? So what you then, the dilution cost. So currently the dilution cost is $250. So a lot of this is coming from some due diligence that I'm doing for a team that are looking to sell at the moment. Okay, so there's a big chunk of this has come through due diligence from lawyers. Okay, so there's a 250 currently. The dilution fee is about 250. In the next set of Concord agreements, it's agreed it's going to go to 450. Toto is already, and you can pull out figures left, right, and centre. Toto occasionally drops a little nugget into an interview where he says that it should be $1 billion. There's a big difference between 250 and $1 billion. Okay, so that's what Cadillac have got to pay. Okay, so their agreement in principle says we agree to come in principle as long as the dilution fee doesn't go from here to here, because There's a $750 million difference between those two figures, which is impactful to anyone, even to a Cadillac. Add on to that the cost of getting an engine ready for the end of the decade. Sounds like a long way away, but reality is you've got that from scratch. They have to build an engine that's ready to race and to compete by the end of the decade.
So are you saying that it would be more realistic for a team to just purchase an existing team? I don't think that's controversial. So just to remind our listeners, we're speaking to Matthew Carter, who was the former CEO of the Enstone-based team.
I mean, German or English? German or French? Tell me, just German or French? I'm just going to say those words and read your face.
We will
German?
We will not press on that any further.
French.
Not now, Flavio. Go back.
I'm fascinated with this because my feeling was like the 250 million dilution fee was way too low. They got caught with their pants down and people jumped in and like 3 distinct bodies came in and went, yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, 250. Yep. We can turn that into $1 billion. And then I think the dirty compromise is making them wait until the next increment. So now it's gone up to, I think it's 450. Yeah, and that's still not where Toto Wolff would want it to be, though.
Well, okay. So this is a whole conversation about the American franchise model in sport, what they're trying to do, and what they've sold to the teams, how they sold the cost cap, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It all builds on the same thing. And being one of those 10 teams is suddenly work. So don't forget, in 2016, I sold Lotus, or I headed, but we sold Lotus to Renault for £1.
What?
Okay.
Really?
It was sold for £1, and Genie, the company that I represented, worked for, maintained a 10% shareholding in the team, which is now Alpine.
Oh.
That was sold for £1. Okay. In the same year, or the next year, 2017, Manor folded completely, went into administration, went from being an F1 team to being worthless. Literally, we have to close the door and sell the assets because it's not worth any money. Lawrence Stroll walked in and bought Racing Point for $0. Again, he covered some debts. Walked in and bought it for $0. Now, you're talking of teams, so that was 2016-17. So 8 years later, we're talking of teams being valued at $1 billion. Okay, so there's a huge difference there. And that's the bit that all of the teams are grasping onto now and saying, well, hang on a minute, we've suddenly got, we've put the hard yards in here. We've worked in this sport for 20, 30 years. We've done all those times where it lost money hand over fist. We've been through all of that. And now we've got something that's profitable. The reason it's profitable is because we're one of the 10. We don't want to allow an 11th. Why would we allow an 11th? Why would we do that? And that's where they've got to. And they got forced into this. They can talk about the fact that there's not enough garages at racetracks and all that rubbish. But basically,
that was rubbish.
They just want to be one of the 10.
Oh my, right, no, right, okay. We've had sorry, Matt, I know. We're both sitting here just screaming. Right, so firstly, did I hear this right? Genie, that were running Lotus F1, I thought they were out of F1.
No, so, they sold the 10% about 3 years ago, something like that. But they maintained a 10% shareholding for a long time. They still had their logo was still on the front suspension strut for years and years and years.
Yeah, no, because that makes like £1 and 10% is not the same thing as £1 and Honda and Ross Brawn by any stretch of the imagination. No, that's not a terrible return for them, given how much the valuations increased. I just felt like making that point.
No, but hang on. And sorry, Matt, I don't wish to jump over.
No, cut him off, it's fine.
When Donaldson bought Williams in 2020, generally was accepted, and in the circles that I speak and talk and deal with, generally accepted that they paid far too much at 100 million. It was insane.
Wow,
why on earth have Dalton spent so much money on Williams? This is like Claire Williams has swum the channel. She's absolutely smashed this out the park by getting 100 million for it. That was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
4 years ago. It was in the middle of the pandemic, I think. So 4 years ago. And now all of a sudden, every team that's on the grid is worth $1 billion.
Yeah.
Why is that? It's because of what Liberty have done. It's because of what, the same old stuff that everyone,
drive
the
to
same
survive.
mantra, drive to survive.
Very simple.
Liberty, the US, what they've done.
Global market's growing.
And people I speak to say that's going to triple as well.
Is now cheap.
No, that's the bit that I will counter. But
okay.
I personally,
I agree.
It's my view, I cannot see how that trajectory can continue. From £1 to $1 billion in 8 years, it can't go anymore. They can't add more races. Okay. So one of the reasons that teams are making money is because of the cost cap. We all know that. And the things that are outside of the cost cap are what is changing the dynamics of the sport, in my opinion. One of those is drivers, and that's another thing that we can get onto. And the reason that there was all the booing and stuff at the F1 Live event, I think, is because what they're building, drivers' salaries are outside the cost cap. So therefore, best drivers are going to go to the teams that have got the most money. It kind of makes sense. And therefore, you create this, it's more of a sporting dynasty culture, you against us. It all goes all the way back to 2014 when they gave drivers their own numbers. It's all trying to build that stars, make the drivers the stars and not the teams. But anyway, go back to where we were. So what Liberty have built is 10 teams, 10 franchises that are worth a fortune because of where they are. And their money comes from the promoters and from the TV money. That's what the main income, the only sources of income that come into a Formula One team, the money that you get from the commercial rights holder and your sponsors. Basically, that's it. A little bit of merch and stuff like that, but that's generally outsourced now anyway. So back in 2015, 2016, it was roughly 50-50 with us at Lotus. So 50% came from Bernie, 50% came from sponsors. And that figure is still about the same. But the pie that they're getting split 10 ways, again, it's a bit more nuanced than that, but the pie that gets split 10 ways only gets bigger and bigger. If they sign a bigger TV deal, the pie gets a little bit bigger. If the promoters generally go from 5 million to 10 million, the pie gets a little bit bigger, and all the teams get the fallout from that. So why would they allow someone else to walk in? And certainly not, that's why the whole pushback with Andretti, because it's Andretti and he's, again, don't take this the wrong way, Matt, he's a brash American walking down the pit lane, waving his piece of paper in the air saying, I'm coming into F1. And you've got, again, we can look down our noses and be disdainful, but you've got the people that have done the hard yards and say, well, hang on a minute. Now, all of a sudden, that a team's worth money, and why are we letting this guy come in?
Okay, so the narrative that is being fed to the fan on the ground like me is that basically Andretti won. They've won, they're in, they're going to be the 11th team on the grid, they're going to pay the slightly lower but still pretty bargain dilution fee, and they're bringing this engine in. But when you say, okay, if they don't bring that engine in, are we saying that they'll be let in, but if they don't bring the engine in, they're back out again? Like, that's a caveat. So this makes sense. I think Liberty Media and the teams kind of speak as one. So you were getting the same talking points from all the team principals, which, you go, well, they're in the same industry. They might have a kind of a group think. But you specifically had Christian Horner saying, well, what's the value in Cadillac? They're not even bringing in their own engine like we have. The badge says Red Bull power unit. Oh, it's fallen off. No. We'll put that back there. That is a Red Bull power unit.
It's not an H. That's not an H. Ignore that.
You had Christian Horner basically backing up everything you've just said there and making that like a media talking point, almost prepping us for a time when Cadillac can't bring an engine in, and then they have to be, you didn't fulfill the agreement. Have I read that right? Have I pieced things together, or am I the madman on the chart, on the board, putting strings and pins?
I mean, again, I obviously am not party to any of the contracts or any of the agreements that have been signed or what's been said, but I think it would be even more onerous than that. I think that the penalty, they wouldn't just let them come in for 5 or 6 years, test the water. Yeah, we're building an engine. Yeah, it's going really well. It's going really well. Oh, look, we didn't do it. That's not going to happen. So there must be something more onerous or more strategic along the way that they have to hit. And also, the key point of this is that dilution fee that you just said. Again, it's talked about in loose terms. I'm not sure how much of this is actually out in the public, but the 250 to 450, 450 to $1 billion, none of that's been agreed yet.
Right.
That's what's going into the next Concord agreement. So the 250 is the bit that stands, okay? But they have said, Liberty, the teams, everyone has said, we are not letting anyone come in at 250. It's not happening, okay? You have to pay the new dilution fee. So Cadillac are going, yeah, we'll do that. We'll pay the new dilution fee. What is it? Well, could be 450, could be $1 billion. Well, that's a big difference. We need to have some sub-clause context in here that says if it goes to 10 billion, they're not just going to write a check. So there's got to be some form of contractual obligation in there that allows them to get out of anything that they're potentially
And you
signing
think
up
that the engine is one of those?
for. Yeah, I know it is.
I would bet money right now on GM bringing an engine over Audi.
Yep.
If I'm being honest,
Yep.
I think GM's a much better prospect long term if they're committed to the sport. Having said that, the where I want to drill down a little bit, because what gets lost in the whole Andretti saga is they were originally buying Sauber.
It's not Andretti anymore as well. He's been forced out.
I do
They've changed
know.
the name. He's not allowed to be called Andretti. Don't mention his name anywhere near the team.
It was never Andretti. It was always his buddy from Indianapolis who runs the hedge fund or venture capital fund or whatever it is. That was always the money behind it, and it was pretty substantial.
Venture capitalists say trumpets. Ugh. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, if you're looking at the kinds of money we're talking about, we're not finding them in our couch cushions. Otherwise, we'd be running a Formula One team by now. But they were originally going to buy at $350, I think. So I could easily see a negotiated settlement between the teams and Cadillac for that $450, $550 being separate from the Concord agreement. Like, this is my outsider view of it, because they seem to be spending far too much money to not be fairly certain of trying to field a team in 2026. So my gut instinct, my vibe check here is there is an agreement to get them on the grid.
Yeah.
And they're going to provide the engine. It's just been going on so long, and I'm so frustrated because ultimately, if you don't add teams, you don't grow the pie. That's my argument.
Oh, I don't buy that.
My point.
More teams is more drivers from more countries, more viewers, and bigger drama. That's my argument. It's really simple.
Yeah, but why, as one of the 10 teams, why would you want to let anyone else come in when the pie, we'll continue to call it the pie, we'll go down that analogy.
Yep.
The pie is made up of the promoters' fees and the TV money, basically. Again, much more nuanced, but that's basically the pie. So promoters' fee, TV fee, funds. So as that gets bigger, you're going to get 10% of it. You're giving away a percentage of that pie for $250 billion. I think the quote that Toto actually came up with was that $1 billion is not enough. I think was the way he worded it. He said, "I don't even think $1 billion is enough when you look at where." And my argument against that is that all of these people are continuing to look at the growth. And again, we can reiterate from 2016 £1 to $1 billion. They're looking at that growth and thinking that trajectory is going to continue, and it can't. It physically cannot.
Investments always go up.
They're going to saturate sponsors. They're going to saturate everything.
See, but that's my whole pie increasing argument in a nutshell. If you don't change anything, there's no guarantee that it gets bigger. So you have to keep adding, or at least changing, or else if you're not growing, you're shrinking. Just like in Formula One, if you're not bringing updates, if you're using last year's chassis, sorry, Alpine, then you're falling behind.
To end, then, why don't we talk about the outfit that Mr. Carter was in charge of? Because, as Matt put it, Alpine are the first team to admit defeat in 2025. But I hate it. I understand why there might be a pragmatic reason for pouring resources into 2026. But you look, this franchise model does lend itself to having the option, as a lot of, I think, American leagues have, where you go, let's just forget about this season and the next season. And I just watched some film with the guy from Field of Dreams. I can't remember who that is. If they build it, they will come. And he's trading his draft picks. And he's basically saying, I'm giving up the next 7 draft picks so that I can do well this season. Okay, there's only 10 teams on the grid. We can't afford to have 8 of those teams waiting for 2026 and just Ferrari and McLaren trying to win the 2025 Constructors' Championship. It drives me absolutely mad.
Why
in this model.
Why do you think Alpine have thrown the towel in?
Oh, because they've said basically it's the same car as last year. We're not doing anything else.
They're all ultimately going to be the same cars. You're coming towards the end of regulation change. You get to a point where, and this has been my sort of view for a long time, but the difference between the start of a season and the end of the season within when the regulations are the same is just that you haven't seen that car every 2 weeks. So the changes would have happened anyway, but you've just got a longer gap before you see the car again. You go, oh my God, look, they've changed this, that, and the other. Whereas if the season had been continuing all the
Oh, I
way,
see
then
what
you
you're saying. Right. Yeah. Okay.
because they've still got 1,000 people back in the factory that are trying to justify their job. They've still got 1,000 people that are saying, look at the aero that I've created here, there, and everywhere.
And those people have to write a weekly email to the bosses to justify what they've done in that last week as well, or that will be taken as a resignation. So that's true that there is this incremental thing that's, sorry, America, sorry, twice in a row I've offended you all. But say Ferrari have turned up this year and they are claiming that they have 90% a new car. So not all the teams have just sort of given up and fallen into this incremental regulation set. I think Ferrari are quite smart to look at this and go, oh, everyone else is packing it in for 2026. Maybe this is an opportunity to grab some titles. But Alpine are the only ones that have said, nah, we're not bothering. The camera's on you, trumpets.
Oh, I'm just going to say, what is the cost benefit then? If I'm Alpine and I finished, what was it, 6th by a miracle race in Brazil only, what is the cost benefit of the money spent versus staying in 6th versus falling to 8th and saving that money and looking at the next regulation set?
Yeah, but Alpine's a basket case anyway, because they're just wrapping themselves up to sell. I mean,
are they?
You can't
really.
That would not have occurred to me during the course of this podcast.
Never have we
not
speculated
clarified it just then.
So you can't include them in the. I don't think they can be included in the same context as everyone else. But ultimately, is the team worth more money if it's doing well? Yes, it is.
So why?
So I think they will put some time.
You think they will? You think the new team principal there, Ollie Oakes? Yeah. It seems very positive, seems very nice and grounded, but he's essentially part of this new business that has come in. I'm assuming there's some business that's come in that has employed Ollie Oakes and Flavio Briatore. Am I getting close to what's going on at that group? Because it doesn't feel like Renault, does it? It doesn't feel like Renault to me.
I mean, I don't know what you have to say about Renault. I mean, it's as I say, they're a basket case. I mean, they've chosen to promote Alpine as a car brand that doesn't. I mean, they're all over the place. Flavio's been brought in as specifically, it's what it's worded out in the press. He's an advisor to the Renault board, so he's advising the Renault board. So he's not advising the Alpine board; he's advising the Renault board as to what they should do with the asset, which is the Alpine F1 team. And that asset has gone from costing them £1. They chucked some money into it, and it's now worth, well, who knows? I mean, we can speculate. I mean, because they sold 10% for whatever they sold to Ryan Reynolds and all those people that said they were going to get involved and then never turned up at any races or did it. Yeah. So because they sold 10% for 8%, you can't then multiply that by another 90% because the controlling interest has never been signed. So, the valuations of all of these F1 teams is up in the air. Toto can sit there and say he values Mercedes-Benz at 3 billion because he owns a third of it. So he's going to say that. It's like turkeys voting for Christmas. He's going to say, oh yeah, no, it's worth 10 billion, 20 billion or whatever. Same with Christian Horner to a lesser extent.
I agree with you a lot. I think they've adopted tech valuations for a non-tech asset. Yeah. You are a keen financial mind. You have been in the sport. What's a fair valuation right now for an F1 team? If you were going to buy an F1 team, let's say Alpine, say I'm finishing 5th to 8th.
Yeah, say Alpine.
I want to get into, I say Alpine because they finished 6th. Aston is off the market because they're spending billions.
You could have picked any team, but yeah, why not? Let's go with Alpine.
Alpine, Haas, Racing Bulls. Those are the three teams.
Alpine, though.
I'm because they're high enough up. They're going to get some media coverage. Potentially, I could sell that to sponsors. What's a fair valuation?
What's interesting about Alpine as well?
He's not going to answer.
Is that I will. But what's interesting about Alpine is it's also the team name that's up for grabs as well, which is quite rare. So if you went in as Missed Apex and you bought Alpine, it could be the Missed Apex F1 team. And that's quite rare.
Oh,
So, Ferrari's never going to change its name.
The
Mercedes isn't
look
gonna
on
change its name.
Spanner's face right now.
But you've got a complete. There's every time it's referred to as the team name. So, I think if you wrote a check out to
who, Matthew Carter?
to Renault for about. So bear in mind they've sold a chunk. They sold the Ryan Reynolds lot, bought 25%. So I think they've got about 75% left. I think if you wrote a check to them for their 75% for about 600, 700 million, you'd own an F1 team.
Okay, that's lower than I thought.
Yeah. Well, you have to. You've got to pitch it as to where the other teams sit, where the cost of entry, the cost of building a factory, the cost of all of those things, there's a line which is where it sits right now.
And let's be very clear, you're talking about the physical assets that go with Alpine 2 and not just the team name and
so what's interesting
rights
about
to run.
What's interesting about Formula One, and I think is unique in a lot of sports franchises. So you're buying the limited company. So when you buy Alpine, you're buying the UK limited company that was Tolman, Benetton, Renault, Lotus,
yeah.
Renault, Alpine, the same company. And it's that limited company. And that's why it was always so, when companies went into administration or went into insolvency, that was why it was such an aggressive line that people took. So that limited company owns the entry into the F1 Championship, the Formula One World Championship. And that's the reason that Mercedes-Benz were whatever they were in their past, and Red Bull were Jaguar and all those things. So you're buying a limited company. So that limited company owns Enstone. It owns the simulator, the wind tunnel, the factory, all of that.
And the F1 entry.
And the entry into F1. And that's what you're buying. That's effectively what you're buying. And that's what you're paying your... So again, Renault have sold 24 point something % to Otto, to the Ryan Reynolds lot, Redbird. So you're buying 75%. I think if you gave Renault 700 million, which values the whole overall team at just under $1 billion, I think you'd walk away with a team. But I personally think that's overpaying right now.
What would you
and
pay?
I think that valuation's based on a trajectory that has been seen for the last however many years since Liberty been involved, and that trajectory cannot continue the way that it is. And I think that if Liberty don't get their F1 TV deal over the line, then they'll walk away as well, because someone will offer them a big chunk of cash and they'll walk away.
I've just checked my balance in my current account. I have £352. So for just under 750 million, you and I could team up.
I'm fairly certain we could just borrow the rest from a bank.
Yeah. We'll be good for it. Guys, I've got so much to process from the last 20 minutes of conversation with Matthew Carter. I have missed you being on the show. I'm delighted to have you back in the shed. And you have to, as viewers, look at his eyes. There's a certain thing he does with his eyes when he's trying to pretend that it's just a fan. It's just a fan bit of guesswork here, when actually he knows the real answer. But I'm going to go ahead and assume, and I don't want you to be insulted by this, I'm going to assume there's no social media to follow right now?
No.
Well,
I tell you what I was also going to say to you, actually, because I noticed that you've grown quite a bit in the last couple of years.
Yes.
Even though I've not been on, I don't know how that's happened.
He's been working out a lot.
No,
I beg to differ.
It doesn't mean my waistline. That's
sorry.
a different issue.
I was going to say, I don't know whether or not, because there's probably a ton of people that have no idea who I am and my background and stuff. So I don't know if you do like a Patreon episode or something where we can go into my background. Or
I'd love
if
that.
they can go
Yes.
back and find it. I don't know.
No, I would love that. I would absolutely love you to join us for a Patreon show.
Because I think a ton of people have heard the story, but there's all the Kimi Räikkönen.
I'd love to go through that again. Oh, and thank you for offering to do that as well, because a Patreon show, it's a bit loose. So, for example, then Matt was making fun of my waistline, whereas
I was being complimentary. You
were
worked
not.
hard.
Right,
worked hard.
I have lost a stone recently, so that's like £14. And a lady at tennis noticed and said, "Oh, Richie, you're looking a lot more tennis shaped." And I was telling the story over dinner, and my son said, "Are you sure she didn't say tennis ball shaped?" And I was like, I was so proud of him in that moment, but also deeply insulted. And that's the kind of thing we can stray into on a Patreon show if Matthew.
And did she call you Richie? Did I hear?
Yeah, that's kind of what I've always been in sport and the army.
Really?
I've always been Richie, except for my family all call me Ricky, which I've always hated. And then I said to them, guys, I really don't like it when you call me Ricky. And then for about 2 weeks, they'll remember, oh yeah, we're not supposed to call him Ricky. And then it goes straight back to it. So if you really want to insult me and troll me on the internet, Ricky, that's the one. And we'll find out what Matthew Carter's childhood name was as well. You can't follow him on social media. You can support us at patreon.com/Missed Apex. Now, Mr. Carter has dangled that carrot of that episode. The season is starting, and I am going to be doing some TikTok lives whilst we watch the testing. I think we're going to do that tomorrow and Friday. We might join Stuffy on his YouTube channel as well to do some YouTube lives. And we are going to be getting back into doing the sort of monthly Patreon shows as well. So until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. I am not tennis ball shaped. I'm more of a Malteser shape. Matt, I can see you trying to say things. Don't do it.